Why exactly does Azula go crazy at the end of the Avatar series? Well, it's pretty interesting to think. I think she was also a victim at the same time. I believe it was a culmination of everything that she had to deal with from the birth all the way to the end of the series in The Last Airbender. We even get to see after in the comics that she does go on a very vengeful path, and eventually in the latest comics, she does get some sort of redemption, but we're not 100% sure how it's going to go, simply because in The Legend of Korra, we have no information about Azula whatsoever. So we don't actually know if she got redemption or not. And as we dive into her early life right here, we learned that Azula actually was pretty kind in her really early days. I mean, when Zuko and her were little kids and the mom was still living with them. By the way, the mom's name is Ursa, and she's actually the granddaughter of Avatar Roku, which makes Azula and Zuko Avatar Roku's great grandkids. That's something very interesting to note. Ozai was very petty and made sure to marry into this family. As we continue on here, we learn that obviously Zuko is the firstborn son. He's being groomed for the throne, which makes a lot of sense because this is normally how it works. The firstborn son is groomed to be the next leader, and as we know, Ozai already has a plan in mind. He's just buying time until the comet comes so he can literally win and destroy all the other nations. So as he's going really hard on Zuko, Zuko doesn't really have it in him for all this destruction and hatred. Zuko's a very soft-hearted boy, and because he was being treated so badly by his father, his mother would literally jump to protect him and Azula, until one day when Azula started to realize that Zuko was getting a lot more love and affection from her mother, which caused her to actually believe that her mother loved him more. And because of this, she started to stray very far away from her mom and form a better relationship with her father, or so she thought. She would literally try her best in training, do everything to show that Zuko was the weaker sibling. Zuko was worth nothing. Because I mean, at the end of the day, she does feel like she was second fiddle simply because Zuko was the firstborn. So she's going to overwhelm this by simply being more powerful. And that's what she does. She becomes so much like Ozai that her mom is disgusted. Her mom realizes and sees the coldness in Azula's eyes, and she does not want her around. So she's trying her best now to just protect one of their kids, which is Zuko. And this really sets a bitter taste in Azula's mouth. This is where I think the darkness starts for Azula, and Ozai is taking full advantage of that. And eventually the mom does have to leave her two kids in the care of Ozai, because if she stayed, her kids would have probably been killed, and it's not really what she wanted. But that's a story again for another time. So we know what happens to Zuko. He goes off on the search for the Avatar. Now this is the point where Azula thinks to herself, okay, so now that he's gone, I'm going to be the one that's going to ascend to the throne of Fire Lord eventually, right? And that's the mindset she has through the early set of this series. She's the prodigy. She's learned lightning bending. Her father's very proud of her, the one parent that she had left that she was trying to get approval from, and Zuko is gone. So she doesn't really have to worry about any of that. She just has to continue on her path, and eventually she'll reach her goals and be recognized by the entire nation. She does also have two friends, Mei and Ty Lee, but you have to remember how she keeps friends. She doesn't actually trust anybody. She just has friends that are very useful to her, and she uses fear to ensure that they stay under her and in their lane. She doesn't want them to cross her. She doesn't want them to say no. Whenever she says to jump, you better jump, or she will get rid of you. And this is how Azula is going to treat everybody except for her father. She tries to, but at the same time she knows her father is above her, so it's probably not going to work. Now in the next chapter of Azula's life, she's going to go out here and capture Omashu. Now this is very, very important to her story of how she's going to break down. In this, we get to see how capable she is. She's such a powerful bender, as well as so intelligent and political. And she basically captures the city like it was nothing. And this goes to show how powerful she really is and how well versed she is in everything in the world. Now, obviously, we do know that it doesn't pan out and Bumi does get back his city, but that's just because Bumi's a crazy old dude, and I do believe he let this happen on purpose. I'm pretty sure he could have stopped this by himself, but I think he was really bored. And later on, we get to see how deadly she is when she literally infiltrates and technically takes over Ba Sing Se. And I say this because she was able to control the Dai Li. She outwitted Long Feng like it was nothing. Now as we continue on right here, we do see her beat the Avatar, and I think that victory she had over the Avatar really set her on a different pedestal. She truly believed that her father would only love her. Her father would give her everything because of this act. As we know, Aang doesn't really die, thankfully, or that would have been it for the war. I don't think there was any other way for them to win unless Iroh had probably stepped up and did an Agni Kai, which he stated himself he wasn't going to do. But back to Azula, we get to see her here in such high confidence. She has two friends who she considers her minions. She has a resume of conquering cities, and she's getting praise from her father. It's everything she wanted in life. She's unstoppable. So what's to come for Azula is the episode The Beach, where we get to see the group, Zuko, Azula, Mei, and Ty Lee, sit down by a campfire and they get to open up about themselves. Obviously, Azula's pretty hardened and doesn't really have anything to share. She kind of thinks she is everything. But when Ty Lee starts to open up about herself, Azula kind of berates her and Mai steps in to defend her. Now, Zuko does go off on them too, but Zuko was going through his own things and they don't really care about him. But the fact that Azula did this to her so-called friend, even though her friends know she uses fear to control them, they still believe that Azula does care for them inside. And this kind of shows that she doesn't. Now we get to see this reach a tipping point in the episode The Boiling Rock, where she doesn't really care about the safety of Mai and Ty Lee. Her one goal is to capture Zuko at all costs. She's even willing to kill her brother. It's like nothing for her. She's willing to do everything to ensure she succeeds in this mission. And this is where Mai tries her best throughout the episode to get Azula to realize what she's doing here. She also tries to ground her, but it doesn't work. And it comes to a tipping point where we get to see Mai stand in between Azula and Zuko, stating that her love is greater for Zuko than her fear for Azula, which confirms that they really do know at this point that Azula doesn't really give two pennies about them, which is pretty sad. But Azula in this moment had two options. She could have apologized, said, okay, let's go home, blah, blah, blah. But she chooses to go in fighting stance and was about to get rid of Mai like she was nothing, which causes Ty Lee to see this, interrupt this fight by chi blocking Azula, which shows that Ty Lee immediately chose Mai's side. And in that moment, Azula lost the two closest people to her, which I believe were grounding her. And this is where Azula starts to break in the series. She no longer has her two friends, Mai and Ty Lee. She's been abandoned and they're not trying to ground her anymore. And the only person she believes she has left in her life is her father, Ozai. And then eventually she believes she's going to be Fire Lord, which Ozai kind of, shows her that that is not the case, basically telling her she's never going to be Fire Lord. He is going to be something even greater than the Fire Lord. So she's basically going to be nothing to him. And that's when she starts to scream out and yell at him, basically saying, you can't treat me like Zuko. This is unfair since she's worked her whole life for him. But Ozai doesn't really care. Azula was always a tool, and when Azula starts to realize this is what breaks her. But what is she going to do? Attack Ozai? Ozai is way stronger than her and would have demolished her in a second. So when Ozai goes off to war, Azula's breaking down even more and says, you know what? I'm going to get myself crowned Fire Lord, and uses her fear and power to try to get the Fire Sages to do this. Now they have no choice. They also know to themselves that when Ozai finds out about this, if he does win the war, it's going to be a problem. And at this point, this is where Appa shows up. Now he has Zuko and Katara on his back. Now what's funny about this is you can immediately see the Fire Sage go, oh no, I'm stopping. He takes that crown back. Now when Zuko and Katara jump off, Zuko immediately realizes something off with Azula. And he was right, because Azula is no longer herself. She's not as sturdy and strong as she used to. She's doubting herself and everything. And Azula says, you know what? This is the perfect opportunity. I challenge you to an Agni Kai, Zuko. This will show her dominance. And since she's always technically felt second fiddle to him, what better way than to get rid of him in this moment? Zuko says, okay, no problem, because again, he's realizing something is off with Azula. Now, Azula thinks she's going to overwhelm Zuko easily, causing him to fall because she thinks him as weak. But what she doesn't know, he's found his redemption. He is who his uncle has always thought he could be, and he's again showing his loving, kind heart. And Azula and him go to battle. Now, Zuko is holding his own. I remember being a kid and I was super surprised. I was like, oh yeah, this is great. He's holding his own against his sister, and she's not finding an opening to win this. It comes to a standing point where she is going to lose. So she decides to play dirty, and when she decides to play dirty, she aims her lightning straight at Katara. Zuko, again, this is his new friend. Also, I think he did like Katara a little bit. This is what I always thought as a little kid, and I guess other people thought this too. So he dove in the way, took this shot, and Katara is freaking out. Now Katara knows she can go up against Azula. Not 100% sure if she can win, but she's pretty sure she can at least fight her. So they start to duel, and Katara is mocking her, breaking her down mentally, because you have to understand, Azula thinks of Katara as a water tribe peasant. She is of no worth, and this peasant is holding her own, no worries. And eventually it comes to the point where Katara is about to win this battle as she freezes both of them in ice, and Azula's losing it. You can see it in her eyes. She's freaking, she can't move, she can't do anything. And Katara basically drops the ice by melting it, and they capture Azula, and this is where she breaks. It's all over. She starts to cry, probably for the first time in her whole life, I would say, and she starts to shoot fire out of her mouth. Now this isn't the end here, because she still gets to see Zuko be crowned Fire Lord, and that probably eats her away inside, which causes her on this massive revenge path in the comics, where she's basically a guerrilla team trying to get rid of the Fire Lord and cause destabilization everywhere. Now these are everything that we know that sets her over the edge in this series. She has been through so much, but you also have to understand she is a victim. Yes, a lot of these choices were her own and nobody else can be blamed for them, but at the same time you have to understand that she was not fully at fault. Her father really took advantage of her and used her like the perfect tool. She was never worth anything to him. All she wanted was love, but she went about this in the wrong way, which caused her to lose everybody in her life.